So I'm living in the splendid hotel in Saigon. It's 1968, and I'd lived there until the early spring of 1969 as I ran this, developed really this magazine from scratch. And my roommate was a Marine guy, as I recall, and he'd come in from the field and so forth and so on. But one of the endearing qualities about this guy was he is an inveterate saver of every centerfold Playboy ever did. And he had put them up on the wall. So an entire wall was covered with uh, scantily clothed women uh, and so on. Okay, and that's so I come back one day in the middle of the day, and in the middle of that wall, one of the pictures is missing. And I think, wonder what that was. I come back that night, and it's back. And I'm intrigued by this, so I come back another day just to kind of see, and then a different picture is missing, and so on. So I go find Mama-san, who works the room, cleaning up our room, and I said, "Hey, where's the picture?" And she said, "Oh, I'll go get it and bring it back." And I said, "Well, where is it?" She said, "Oh, it's next door at the embassy annex, and we're Xeroxing 50 copies of it." And she was Xeroxing the entire wall of these pictures from Playboy. The other thing that happened was staying on the Splendid Hotel for a minute. We're up on the fifth floor of 6 floors, and by this time they were rocketing the city, and other stuff was going on in Saigon with 122 rockets, and I was at a point where that was irritating because they would rocket us at night, and usually about 2 o'clock in the morning, it would wake me up, I didn't appreciate it. But a truism about the 122 was that if it hit the Splendid Hotel, it would not explode on the 6th floor. It could penetrate down to the 5th floor. And guess who's living on the 5th floor? Me. And so initially, when when I first moved down to Saigon, I was living in the Splendid Hotel, and the rockets would come in. And by the way, it was like the sound will always stay with me because it was like a piece of 4x8 plywood being dropped into dust. Kaboom, kaboom, and and so on. So anyway, I would get up and go in the bathroom, and the bathroom had the shower. Everything was concrete, and it was all concrete on 3 sides. So I'd go sit in the shower. So if a rocket came in and penetrated, it would have to hit me right in the shower. It was crazy. Think I didn't do that for too long, and for good reason, because one night, one morning really, um, they start rocketing us, and I hopped up and I headed for the bathroom, and my roommate was there, and when he'd come in, he would stand under the shower for a prolonged period of time, and he'd get water on the floor into it, and so I'm going into the bathroom, kind of trotting in the bathroom, and he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, we're being rocketed." And so he's right behind me, and he runs, a big guy, and he ran over me and knocked me, my leg wound up in the toilet, and I'm gripping the faucet, and then I look over, and he's sitting in the shower stall, um, as well. One other thing about this guy, when he was getting ready to leave, he was fixed. I had a clock, and having a clock, um, it's odd what they would have in the PX and not have in the PX. And the PX was on a Cholan, and it was the greatest PX in all of Vietnam. And Cholan, you could understand, they would have everything, except they wouldn't have everything. They'd be out of certain things. And one day when I was down there, they had clocks, and I bought a clock. And we never saw a clock down there, or I didn't at least, nor did my roommate. And he became increasingly fixated on my clock. He wanted my clock. And I said, "Well, you can't have it." So I'm leaving. I'll give you $5. And they kept betting it up. And I kept saying, "Look, I can't, clock's dear to me. I don't want." So I came home the night after he's gone. My clock's gone. He stole my clock. I don't remember his name. Okay, every afternoon at 5 o'clock uh, in a building, and really was hardly more than a wide spot off the street, right across from the Continental Hotel. There would be the briefings by the Army military on how many uh, plane missions they'd run, how much bombing they'd done, how many leaflets they dropped, all of this, how many of the bad guys they'd killed that day, and so forth. And the press would be there in great numbers. And so I kept hearing about this, and I could go anywhere I wanted to. And so finally, I went across the street and went to the what they called, the press called 5 o'clock follies, because they didn't believe a word that they were being told at the 5 o'clock follies. And I have to say, it was a cage match between the press um, and the military briefers there. And it's basically like they were basically being accused of lying about everything they said. I don't think they were lying about everything they said. I think they were probably just lying about most of the stuff they were telling them. Uh, but the reason I could believe that is because, I had run an intelligence section up country in the Terang for the better part of 5 or 6 months, and I'd seen all the intelligence, or not, never see all the intelligence, but all the confidential stuff and the safe, secret and top secret, and whatever showed up in Stars and Stripes and the other, New York Times, uh, Washington Post, and so forth, which were distributed there off and on, never matched, never matched. This is what's happening, and this isn't. So the press was very bad at finding out what was going on, and they were helped along in their ignorance by the briefings. And this leads to I'm in the Hilton in Tokyo, up there working on the magazine, and downtown, and working on it. And by the way, I would be hosted at Camp Zama, which I think is still there, Zama, Zama. And I could have stayed out at Zama, but life's better downtown at the Hilton, and so that's where I would go. And so I ran into this guy probably down in the saloon in the hotel, and he was an Air Force officer, and he said, he asked me why I was there, and told him, and I said, well, why are you here? And he said, I'm here because the we've had the 998th airplane shot down in in Vietnam, and soon the 999th and the 1000th will be shot down. The press is going to be all over me, and they're going to be really going nuts, and my superior officer is going to want me to sit on this, and I can't. So I'm here until they shoot down the 1001th plane. I'm not going back until after we've gotten past this 1000th plane shot down. And yeah, and you might think, well, how could he do that? Uh, where you are and when you're doing what you're doing, and as officers, we could wander afield um, quite a bit, and no other dog would bark. Not true for enlisted guys, but certainly true for when you're an officer. And this leads then finally to one of my favorite stories about one of our officers. And he ran over himself with his own Jeep. And this does not sound possible. So here's how he did it. He had pulled up to a stoplight, and yes, we had, stoplights, code stop in Saigon, and a load of traffic, and you got motorcycles, everything going all around you. But he was in a Jeep, and as he's sitting here, he hears a sound. Doesn't sound good. So, uh, so he leans over to look under the Jeep, and the Jeeps are low, so uh, you can step in, and they don't have doors. You just step in, and it's no more than I guess, a foot or two, 2 foot or so. So he's leaning over, and he can't see anything at all, but he can hear the sound, and it continues to bother him. So he gets further and further out and further under, thinking maybe he can touch something, and his foot slips off the brake, and he runs over himself with his own Jeep. It's almost impossible to do, but he did it. He wasn't hurt, other than his pride was pretty well hurt, yeah. As would all of ours be. Finally, we'll tell you one last story about the magazine. Among I had quite a educated staff doing the magazine, Vietnamese, and then I had, I think I had 4 enlisted guys who were illustrators, and maybe they're doing paste up and other things. I kind of don't remember, but we also had decided to subscribe to what this fellow called the Vietnamese gentleman, um, do a wire service, Vietnamese wire service, and to get that additional input. And I was never too sold on him, but I would go out and we would sit down and visit. And his stuff was occasionally get into the magazine. But the last time I went to see him, as I'm getting ready to come, he said to me, let's set this up. By this time, the Lyndon Johnson, who was president of the United States, wanted to get out of Vietnam. And he was looking for a way to get out. And the French had walked out of what became North Vietnam in 1954 and just left everybody in the lurch. And my editor, who, as I recall, had been Newsweek's Vietnamese editor, had taken one look. He'd been living up in Hanoi, and this gentleman took one look at the Paris Accords and went home, got a suitcase, and told his wife and kids, "Pack up, we're going south." And she said, "No, I'm not going with you." And he said, "Fine." And he got on the train and he came down to Saigon, and that's how he wound up down in Saigon. And he said, 3 weeks later, one day, here come the wife and his kids, and joined. So in any case, this fellow had a heightened sense of self-preservation. And the last time I was going to see him, he told me, "Don't park in front, park down, come in the back door, I'll leave it unlocked," and so on. So to all appearances, his offices and place was empty and gone and dead. And I came in the back door and he was sitting there. And we discussed whatever it was we had to discuss. And then he said, "I'm leaving." He said, "I'm going out to," I think he was going out to Hong Kong. And he said, "And I've converted what I can to gold and silver." And he showed me how you take gold and silver, and you flatten it out so that it's like a wafer. And he said, "I'm taking this and I'm putting it in a book, in the very front of the book, and then I'm putting my cover on, so that to all appearances, I'm sitting here reading this book on the airline, it won't attract any attention. But I'm getting our gold and our what I can of our resources out of here." By the way, this is 1968, early 69. And the country didn't fall for another 6 years after that. But he was, presumably, he was long gone and safe. I always have come back around and asked about the silver and gold wafer, but primarily the gold wafers, people about them. And the only people who know about this, not in the United States, not anybody else, but one day I'm out in, maybe I was in Vietnam or maybe I was in Taiwan, somewhere, this guy knew all about them. Well, that's the way to move secretly to move your gold around. I don't know that would work today because the X-ray machines might find it or whatever. But he was very afraid, and 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 leaving the country, and I never saw him again.